Well, hey, welcome to the Northway podcast bonus episodes, all about providing opportunities for life change through Jesus by engaging in conversations around the pressure points of life and faith. So a few weeks ago, our congregation finished a series through the book of James where we talked about how God provides wisdom from above to help us to see things his way and to live out the way of Jesus. And a lot of that series focused on the individual life of the believer as it pertains to their relationships and family and maybe vocation, work, and those kinds of things. But one of the areas that we did not spend a lot of time on in the series that I think our board talked about the value of maybe circling back and going into more depth on is just the life of the believer, the follower of Jesus, when it comes to just responsible political engagement. James has some principles that speak into this. Paul and Peter in the New Testament also speak to some of these things, although from an ancient context. And it's easy for me to shy away from discussions like this because they're complex and they can be heated. But I also think that it's good for us to think about what does it mean to engage in every aspect of our world faithfully. So I have with me today Scott McClintock. Scott is he serves on our elder board at Northway, and he's a deep thinker and a broad reader. And so I've asked him to join me to just kind of have this interaction. So Scott, is there anything that you want us to know about you?
Maybe just a few things. So I have a few years on you, a little bit older.
Just a few.
And so I have a couple of adult sons, and they have some very different views than myself and my wife. And so, this topic of how to engage, hits home in terms of family discussions, as well as, neighborhood discussions and friend discussions for sure. I think the other thing that is important, I started to pay attention in the political realm right in late 70s, early 80s. Okay. And so I think it's important to sort of understand from a life experience perspective where I started to pay attention, the Carter administration, Reagan administration. So from then forward has been sort of what I've seen and experienced. And so I think different people in different generations experience different things, and I think it's always important to understand sort of where that experience, where that life experience comes from, and that helps to color their view on things. And it's always good to know where they're coming from. So
yeah, I love that. Yeah, we all we are also all shaped by our context and our culture and what's going on in the world directly with us today, and. And so I think that it's good for us to think through engaging with others also who have seen different decades,
Right.
different seasons, and can offer some insights from that perspective too. So I appreciate you joining me to talk about this.
Good to be here.
So within the context of this conversation, we're just going to kind of organize it around about 5 questions. There will be far more to talk about than one little podcast episode will allow us to. But my hope is that this will at least offer some more clarity and maybe an even greater biblical context to how we think about engaging in this area of politics. So I think the first and most pressing question is why, as a follower of Jesus, should I even think about engaging politically? Why do that?
Well, I think the simple answer is we're called to. I think we're called to engage in all aspects of society, be it political. If you look at Christianity and the impact that it's had over the centuries, starting with this small little band and how it grew and how God took that small band and really impacted the world over time, it's really remarkable. In fact, as we sit here today, whether you're a believer or not, we all have a foundational worldview that's really based upon Christian principles. And so I think it's really important to understand that we're continuing to, and that continues. So we continue to impact the world around us, and I think it's important that we engage, again, in all areas, this being a very specific area, an important area, but God continues to use His church, His people, to be the salt of the earth. So I think it's definitely something that it's part of our mission.
Yeah, that's good. Just to cue on one thing that you said that I think was important is you said we are shaped by sort of a value base or a thought process that comes out of Christianity, the teaching of Jesus. Mm-hmm. Now, depending on someone's generation, they may say, "Oh, that's so true. That's so true." There may be others who would say, "I don't even know what you mean by that. Like, I'm not shaped by that." Mm-hmm. And maybe for them that might actually be true in some ways, but I think that there are things that we just have to recognize have been helpfully shaped by followers of Jesus in this part of the world for quite a while. Like the idea that all people hold an intrinsic value. That comes from a Christian worldview and value system.
Right.
So if you would say, yes, people have intrinsic value, hey, that has been influenced by Jesus. Mm-hmm. And I think what you're getting at, Scott, is that, and you said it well. Followers of Jesus are intended to engage in all parts of life faithfully as followers.
Yeah.
When I think about this, I think about Jeremiah 29, God's instruction to His people who were carried out of their own nation and into exile, into Babylon. And the instruction that they received there is in Jeremiah 29, 5-7, it says, "Build houses and live in them. Plant gardens and eat their produce. Find wives for yourselves and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters to men in marriage so that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there. Do not decrease. Pursue the well-being of the city I have deported you to. Pray to the Lord on its behalf. For when it thrives, you will thrive." And so the instruction to them in exile is engage in every part of life in this place that God has placed you and make it better. Mm-hmm. As far as it depends on you, make it better. Mm-hmm. And I think that's exactly what the Apostle Peter was cueing on to in 1 Peter chapter 2 when he says to conduct yourselves honorably among the Gentiles. And he calls God's people aliens. They're essentially exiles in this world. We're of the kingdom of heaven, but we live here, as it were. And then he calls them to submit to every human authority because of the Lord, whether to the emperor or to the supreme authority. And his point is live faithfully in the context that God has placed you. And so why engage? Why engage politically? Why engage, whether it's at the local level or the state level or whatever that looks like? Mm-hmm. Because part of our calling as followers of Jesus is to make it better.
Well, and you mentioned, being part of the kingdom. I think that's something that we always have to keep top of mind, is we really are part of God's kingdom. And so we have like two passports. We have the kingdom passport and the passport of whatever country we're from. Mm-hmm. And so we're in this dual kind of a environment. But at the end of the day, we are responsible and accountable to God's kingdom. And so as we think about engaging, as we think about what that looks like and how we should interact, I think having that in the back of your mind is just good advice. At least for me, it sort of grounds things relative to whatever we might be talking to or who I might be talking to, because at the end of the day, it's all about expanding the kingdom. And so, yes, a political discussion it can be important, but it's not as important as what I might be able to do in having those discussions relative to the kingdom.
Yeah. I think what you're hitting on is a little bit of what's the why behind your engagement in any area of life or conversation, whether it be public arena, private life and family. Like what's the driving reason why? And I think what you're saying is, as a citizen of the kingdom of heaven, if you are a follower of Jesus, that's your ultimate identity, and it's your ultimate motivation to see the kingdom of heaven brought and move forward. But I think there are some pitfalls that can muddy this conversation when we think about specifically political engagement.
Certainly.
And so what are some of those pitfalls? What are some of those things that we need to keep in mind?
Well, I think number one, know your audience. So depending on who you're interacting with, let's say you're interacting with a believer or an unbeliever. Again, are you trying to win an argument, or are you trying to win somebody for the kingdom? And so as you engage with that individual, again, yes, you're having a discussion around maybe a political topic, but how are you using that discussion to maybe drive it towards, so what's your relationship? Do you have a relationship with God? What do you think about God? How do you think about God? What is, their worldview is such that you're trying to sort of shape that conversation so that you can really get to the point, which is the more important point, which is the eternal salvation. So I think with unbelievers, it's yes, we're engaging, but I have an ultimate goal in mind here, which might be a little bit different than when you're talking with a believer. So I think knowing your audience is super important. I think we also have to keep in mind that we don't have all the information, and so I think we have to come at it in a humble attitude. We had a gentleman come and speak to the men's group a few months ago, Chris Thurman, and he used a phrase that I thought was really good. He said, we have bad thinkers. So because of the state that we're in, our human nature, sometimes we just can't think as well as we should be. And so I think as you're engaging, be cognizant of the fact that you don't have all the answers, and so it's good to, as you're engaging, to ask a lot of questions and try to stay humble. I think another pitfall is just the amount of time and energy we might put into these kind of discussions. Where's the balance? What's is it that important that we're scrolling or we're constantly looking for new information? Okay, that's good to a degree, but is that really the best use of our time?
Yeah.
So is there a balance that we're being able to achieve between that and really other important things in our lives?
Yeah.
I think is good.
I think that's really important. In fact, I was talking with a friend and a congregant a few weeks ago, and they asked me a question. They said, why don't you give people more more stuff to be reading or watching? Like, why don't you give people more sources to eat? And that is actually something I'm trying to grow in. But my answer to them at the time was, hey, my biggest goal as a foundation is to try to help followers of Jesus actually read their Bible. And until they are, until you are spending time in the scriptures, which are the ultimate shaping tool for a regenerated mind, I'm going to be real hesitant to give you a lot of other stuff a lot of other stuff to kind of read and watch and to speak to that time.
That's a great
aspect.
internal check too. On a daily basis, have I consumed the Word, and or has my time been spent otherwise? So just sort of a daily check. Have I consumed the Word? Great, and so now maybe there's some time left over that I can spend on some of these other areas. I think one other pitfall that we might think of is, we might be really passionate about a specific issue or topic, and be looking for a solution, a specific solution. That might happen. A specific individual or party or whatever might come into power, but things change over time, and so at least over the years, I found that I don't get too excited because things are going to change again, and so there's a lot of temporary nature to these kind of issues, and I think we have to be really trusting that in God's sovereignty, He's ultimately going to take care of where the world's headed, and ultimately, obviously, with His Son coming back. But so I think don't get too wrapped up in a specific issue or topic or area where you think that's like the solution, because that's going to change, or wrapped up in a specific individual, for example.
Right.
So.
Just to put specifics on that, just say like, okay, if this list of policies were to be instituted, then finally,
exactly,
things would be back on course.
Exactly.
And I think what you're speaking to is even if the same party or people were to maintain power, which in the democratic system, that we have, that's not even
right.
Highly
unlikely.
That doesn't mean that those individuals would stay the same, or what they think on any given issue would stay the same.
Exactly.
Things are always in flux, and so we need to be really careful how much hope we tie into this person or this constituency or this party.
Yeah, exactly.
I think based on that, it brings up another potential. Maybe it's a pitfall. Maybe it's just something that I think we need to be cautious of as followers of Jesus, and that's and this isn't aimed at any particular party, any particular, but throughout history, it has been, how do I put this? Someone who is running for an office knows that you are a voting bloc, knows that we are a voting bloc, knows that there are certain issues that align with important biblical things. I'll bring up abortion, for example. The Bible is clearly pro-life.
Right.
And like when Roe v. Wade was overturned, as a church, we got up and I addressed the church and said, "Hey, we're celebrating this, because God upholds life. We think this is a good thing." But I do think we need to be aware of the reality that some would tout a value that they know will cause you to vote their way, not because they have a deep value of that, but because they can co-opt a voting bloc.
Right.
And I just think we need to be aware of that. In James 2, verse 6, James says, "Yet you have dishonored the poor. Don't the rich oppress you and drag you into court?" And what James is talking about in this context is favoritism. What he's talking about is when somebody shows up at church and they're clearly rich, you give them a special seat. But in that cultural context, what James is dealing with is that there's something in us that thinks, if I can get this person with worldly influence on my side, then my interests will be served.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason James says, hey, these are the same people who are taking you to court, is because when their interests change, their interests aren't really aligned with Jesus' interests. Their interests were aligned with what was good for them. And so we just have to be aware as we engage in the earthly structures of power that we're interacting with people that can be swayed, people that aren't perfect. Some people that might be followers of Jesus might not be followers of Jesus. And I think we have a tendency to just make things very, very black and white, and to go, oh, I heard the magic word, that I'm gonna vote like that. I'm gonna vote like this. And we need to be as shrewd as serpents, but innocent as doves. We need to pay attention to the fact that these are complex conversations, and that someone would be happy to, co-opt your vote.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuance in all of these issues, and I know we'll talk more about this, but I think understanding context, understanding sort of where that issue fits in, not only amongst other issues, but just in terms of agendas and sort of the bigger picture. And to really understand those nuances takes time, takes energy.
Yeah.
And so, to your point, if you're just looking for snippets of words from people, I think you have to be careful and do more homework and to really understand what's behind that.
Yes.
And that's where, being in a community in a church like this, where you can maybe rely on some others who might know a little bit more about those topics,
Yes.
is very helpful and can help you to maybe see some things that at the surface you wouldn't necessarily understand.
Man, hearing you say that, part of me goes, oh man, that's great. God's put us in community, and we should talk and interact with each other and let one another speak in and sharpen. And also, I think you just hit on maybe one of the biggest, most difficult questions I've had to grapple with as a leader. And I don't think it's a new question. I actually think it's something that the church has had to grapple with for 2,000 years. And that is, what is the role of the church when it comes to speaking into political issues or just in the political conversation? I've interacted with some who are would like more. Other people who are don't ever bring that up. What does that look like from the pulpit? What does that look like in individual conversation? And so I'd love to just camp there for a minute, kind of talk about how do we think about that?
Right.
How do we think about that? So I certainly have some thoughts on that from a church leadership standpoint. Is it good for me to start there?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'll let you take this one.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, thanks, man. I really appreciate that. Well, one thing, so I think there are two aspects of this. One is from a church leadership, pastor, elders standpoint, and the other is realizing that the church is people. And so there's two different angles to look at this. From a church responsibility kind of leadership framework, and as a pastor, I think there are some clear things that I need to and have to and stand before Jesus responsible to do when it comes to my role and responsibility. One is just preach the gospel and preach the counsel of Scripture, the Bible. We're Northway Bible Church,
right?
Because we see the Scriptures as having authority to guide and direct and transform, and to show clearly who God is and what Jesus has come to do to rescue us. And so when that overlaps a political issue, it doesn't matter what the political issue is on the right or the left.
Yeah.
I'm responsible to preach what the Bible says on a given topic. I'll bring one up for you. So the Scriptures are clear that the posture of God's people towards the resident alien needs to be a posture of compassion and care. So I don't get to pick that. That is what the scriptures say on that topic. Now, what the scriptures don't do is say, therefore, here are how many people a country should allow within its borders and all the policies around that.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't speak into the policy.
Yeah.
There's a really good podcast recently, Carrie Newhoff, he does a church leadership podcast. He had J.D. Greer, who was a former president of Southern Baptist Convention, and they had an excellent conversation around this and brought up that exact example. And I really resonated, no matter what you think about J.D. Greer, what I resonated with him on was when I'm standing in the pulpit, God's word is the weight of what I need to be careful to say. And if I can't go chapter and verse and therefore this is the policy, then I need to stay away from speaking into things like that. And I need to stick to, here's what God's word says on this topic. And so I think that's like really, really, I bear a heavy weight of that as a pastor, because those are the things I'm going to believe I'll stand before Jesus and have to give an account to him of like, did I preach his word or some great ideas I thought I had, you know? And I think tied to that, the church is responsible to hold Jesus up as the hope, the only hope that we have to salvation, life change, redemption, restoration. Now, the hope we have in him is then going to impact the way that we live. But I try to be very, very careful that if you come through our doors at Northway and like you're a lifelong Democrat or a lifelong Republican, you're going to hear the gospel message. You're going to hear about Jesus being the only hope. And what I say isn't going to cause someone who votes this way or that way to turn off their ears about Jesus.
Right.
And so I think there's a high call for that needs to be handled with care. So, yeah. I can just keep moving through these. I got a list of them, man.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is the church, from the leadership angle, and the elders are to guard the teaching of the church, which means speaking into potential theological misunderstandings, potential false teaching when it surrounds any given area. And, there are some things out there, especially as it pertains to politics, that are just not biblically sound. And I'll give you an example of that. There's a thought process that looks at a few passages in Scripture and sees the spiritual powers and authorities that are behind the veil, like we can't see them,
Right.
At work and at play. Now, those are real. There are real spiritual powers behind the veil at work and at play in everything that goes on in the world. But some would misunderstand that to think that the way that we deal with those spiritual powers is by getting this person in office or that person out of office. That's the primary way we win the battle for the kingdom of heaven, for example. And I think anything that conflates a human system of government with the kingdom of heaven is really, really suspect at best, dangerous at worst. And that's because it causes us to make our political leaning sort of the rescue for the world, and it makes the other side the demonic power. And Paul addresses this in Ephesians 6, and he's clear in verse 11. I'm going to read this, kind of long, but it says, Paul says, put on the full armor of God so that you can stand against the schemes of the devil. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against rulers, against authorities, against cosmic powers of this darkness, against evil spiritual forces in the heavens behind the veil, as it were. For this reason, take up the full armor of God, so that you may be able to resist in the evil day, and having prepared everything to take your stand, stand therefore with truth like a belt around your waist, righteousness like the armor on your chest, your feet sandaled with readiness for the gospel of peace. In every situation, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. And then Paul says this, pray at all times in the Spirit with every prayer and request, and stay alert with all perseverance and intercession for all the saints. Pray also for me, that the message may be given to me when I open my mouth and make known with boldness the mystery of the gospel. And then he calls himself an ambassador. The reason I read that whole passage is that Paul is pretty upfront, that there really are spiritual powers and forces at play behind the veil everywhere. But the way that we do battle, as it were, isn't to say when this person gets elected, God is winning, and when that person doesn't get elected, whatever, God is losing. It's to move forward with the gospel message, to pray for one another, to use God's word. That's the one offensive weapon in the whole bunch. I just find it fascinating that he doesn't say, so therefore, we really got to get the Romans out of power. That's not what he says.
Yeah, as you were reading, I was just thinking of the context that Paul found himself at that time, and the kind of political leadership and really authoritarian leadership that he was under. We live in a democratic society, and it's nowhere near the kind of he was facing issues that we don't face, and yet this is what he had said. And so I think it's pretty clear, even when we think that things aren't going our way, that our response should be tempered by exactly what Paul had alluded to. And it's just good news that God gives us the tools, right? He gives us his word. He allows us to interact with him in prayer. He gives us community. All these tools that he gives us to be able to fight the good fight. Mm-hmm. But as you said, it's not through a specific individual or cause or whatever. It's really through his power. Yeah. And so, we need to enable ourselves of that. Mm-hmm. And again, it just goes back to where our priorities are. Kingdom focused. Where are we spending of our time? Are we in the Word? Are we praying? Are we enabling all of those capabilities within ourselves so that we can really be useful by Him?
Yeah, and that I think that one could hear some of this and maybe think, are they just saying don't vote for someone, just go pray? And I want to be clear, that's actually not, I don't think that's what you're saying. No. It's definitely not what I'm saying.
Right.
What I am saying is that the result of my vote is not the thing that's going to change the spiritual tide and for a person. Mm-hmm. It's important because, like the exiles in Babylon, mm-hmm. we're called to, as far as it depends on us, like to make things better mm-hmm. and to use the voice that I have in the society and the world that I live in to help things align with the kingdom thoughts and perspective, as far as it depends on me. And sometimes I might be able to really notice that happening in the world around me. And sometimes it may feel like I'm doing everything I can, and it doesn't feel like it's making a difference. Mm-hmm. But the biblical perspective is, as we continue to persevere in these things that Paul has laid out for us, the battle. We know the end of the story, right? Mm-hmm. Jesus wins mm-hmm. in every way. Mm-hmm. And so I do think just a couple of more things I want to mention on that is I do think it's the role of the the leadership of a church to grieve with the people that are grieving. And I think this is one of the things that sometimes is a big challenge, because I don't always know when a part of our church body is grieving. Sometimes I know, and sometimes I don't know, which is why it's important that it's not all based around me. But also, I think we're responsible to pay attention to what's going on in the lives of people. And sometimes what's happening in the public realm is really weighing heavy on people. Yeah. And it is okay to acknowledge that and to talk about that. Sometimes that's private. Sometimes it's in the context of a community group. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's corporate. And even with the assassination of Charlie Kirk not too long ago, before that happened, I had no reference point for who he was, or what he was about. And as I spoke with different people in our church, some who were all over the map with what maybe they thought about him, but some who were just deeply, deeply grieved. And I realized, okay, I've got to keep paying attention to what's happening in the lives of people in our church, so that we can grieve, we can mourn with, we can compassionately care for people who are really maybe having a hard time in an area. So that's been one of the learnings for me, even as we walk through that.
Well, and I would expand that to really the whole, as we've talked in the as part of the elder board, that's really something we're all need to be more conscious of, and it's not just reliant upon yourself, as you said. There's those around you, staff and elders and others around you, as part of the leadership of the church that probably need to do a better job there as well, and in supporting that goal, because I think it is important, and I think we all can play a part in doing that.
Yeah, that's good. And I do think that as we do that, it's important for those of us who are a part of the church to realize that what is moving our hearts, someone else in the church may be totally disconnected from that,
right,
and their hearts have been grieved by a different thing. And to just what we tend to do is go, what should grieve me should grieve you, and what shouldn't grieve you shouldn't grieve me. And it's really not like that. It's what are the people around me going through, and how do we give the right weight to not just what's happening in the church, but what's happening in the world. And that's a constant learning. Mm-hmm. It's a constant learning. So I think this last one that I'll just bring up, and we'll try to move through it kind of quickly because of time. I do think that it's part of the responsibility of the local church to help. The church is its people. The church isn't the pastor. The church isn't the elders. The church isn't the staff. Right. The church is everyone who is a part of the church. But I do think part of the role of leaders is to help people grapple with the difficult issues. Like I said, that might be privately, in smaller groups of community, or corporately. But I do think that's important. And so, from time to time, we have conversations like this to try to dig into issues that are mm-hmm. that are a little bit more complex than a 30-minute message can mm-hmm. achieve mm-hmm. on a Sunday. But mm-hmm. and I think to that point, what's the role of the individual when it comes to this? The individual person in the body, in the part of the church. What's the role of the individual? What do you think about that?
Well, I to play off what you were just talking about, I think it's to listen, and to listen very closely. Ask a lot of questions. Don't just come to your own conclusions. If you're engaging on a specific topic and you're already sort of thinking as you're having your conversation about sort of your next answer, right? We all tend to sort of do that, but really listening well to what that other individual who might have a different point of view, and really try to get down to the core of what their thinking is. You might not agree totally, mm-hmm. But there might be a learning there for you. And if nothing else, by the fact that you're asking questions, and listening closely, that other individual thinks that, that you actually care for what they have to say. And I think, again, sort of coming into these conversations with a humble attitude. I certainly don't know everything, and so I want to learn a little bit about what you're thinking and how I can maybe relate to what I think to what you have to say. So I think asking questions and having a humble posture is being very important. Now, that being said, and as you're being respectful to that, you can still be firm in your own beliefs, especially where they overlap some very clear biblical principles. I don't think that you can absolutely be clear. So it's okay to be firm, but it's the way you do it, right? That matters. And then ultimately, I think you have to trust that it's in God's hands. He's sovereign, and so we have to leave. If we don't necessarily get to a point where we agree on something, we have to leave it in His hands and let Him know that He's going to be ultimately going to work out His will in both of your lives. Yeah. And so I think that's important. I think it's also, getting back to what we talked about earlier, just having a grounding in the Word, and as you're having these conversations, being able to apply some of the principles that you're reading about and learning about, and the Spirit is working within you, and be able to apply that in those given situations, and try to take that wisdom into that conversation. Mm-hmm. So I really do think that also tends to help to sort of humble us in our opinions, and we search for what's the Spirit saying, what's God saying in all of this, and how can we best help that individual by bringing those kind of principles into that kind of conversation.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I think the goal of any conversation we're having, believer to believer, is sharpening and sanctification. Mm-hmm. And so I have not typically found that when I'm engaging with another believer on any topic where we might not see eye to eye, that someone walks away 100% mind changed on something. Mm-hmm. But I tend to change my mind 2% at a time. Mm-hmm. Maybe another way to say that is God renews my mind on various things, just little percentages at a time, as I engage in the different tools that God has given for change, namely His Word and His community and His Spirit. And so do I think I have all the answers today? And to the degree that I think I do, I'm probably the one who's not growing more and more into the likeness of Jesus. Mm-hmm. And so are you open to hearing? It might not be like, I used to think this about this policy and now I think this. Some of it just might be posture. Mm-hmm. Some of it might be priority. Some of it might be, all of those kinds of things. And I think that we should feel open to have conversations as believers on any topic, right, with the goal of becoming more like Jesus. Any topic. So, it's like, can we talk about politics? Yes, we can talk about politics. Can we talk about, money? Like, yeah, we can talk about money. Mm-hmm. Can we talk about parenting? Right. And I don't talk to people about their parenting. They'll leave the church. Like, this is how we're formed. And sometimes that is uncomfortable, but it's also good.
Yeah.
I think the other responsibility that we have as individuals is to do right. James says in James 4:17, so it is sin to know the good and yet not do it. Mm. And so I think it is a mistake to think that if you just have all the answers to how and who you'd vote for, like, great. And that is not unimportant to be thoughtful about that. But what are you actually doing then out of that same conviction to impact the world in some of those same arenas? Mm-hmm. So one of the things we challenged, and I know it sounds like I'm hitting on abortion again and again, but when we talked to the church about the overturning of Roe v. Wade, in the same breath we said, and now if you're excited about this, which you should be, what are you going to do to
about it.
help
Right.
the person who is in a pickle and they don't know how they're going to care for this baby that is forming inside them? And what are you going to do? Because actually, even though that's been overturned, the instances of abortion since that have gone up, not down. And so we don't just want to celebrate change of how law is working. We want to actually impact the world. So like one of the things that like my wife does regularly, serves at a local ministry, dwelling place that helps parents that are fostering kids. And like, let's not just celebrate a policy. Let's, the call for the believer is to do right in the name of Jesus.
Yeah, I like
and so
that.
individually, like we need to do that.
Right.
Man, we are almost, I don't even think we're going to get to our last question. Is there anything? So one of the things we were going to ask just as we wrap up is like, how do you stay informed well? The stats show, like Pew just did Pew Charitable Research just did a thing and found that in general, younger people are following the news even less than they ever were. There are a group of young people that are like really gung ho, but then there's, as a whole, people 18, to kind of 30, kind of in that range.
Yeah.
They're tuning in less, and those that do, more and more are tuning into their favorite influencer.
Right.
And so, not that is necessarily bad, but how do you make sure that you're getting the right information?
Right. That's a great question. For me, I'm looking for context. I try to follow people who can provide context, be it over timelines, periods of time, and understand how things are changing over time, or maybe geopolitically. So it's not just about the U.S.; it's about more of what's happening globally, and balance. Right? They're sort of presenting viewpoints and information in a way that helps you to come to a conclusion. They're not necessarily pushing a conclusion down your throat, but they're letting you think about what that should look like. And so those are the kind of sources I tend to gravitate towards, as well as just for the areas that I'm interested in, just doing some reading. There are still books out there. And so
what's that? No,
exactly. So there's a lot of tons and tons of material and content on all of these different issues, and to the degree that you have some time to dig into it, I would definitely encourage reading, some long reading on some of these topics to really get into some of the nuances and the detail to help you be informed when we're having these discussions. So.
If someone's interested in this, is there any maybe one thing in particular that you would like recommend as reading to just broaden your thoughts?
A couple sources for me from a Christian worldview. Al Mohler's Daily Briefing. I think he does a nice job of taking events out of the paper, as it were, and put some context around that. He also has some longer conversations with authors on books that they've written, and sometimes those are the books that I end up looking at and reading. I'd say that from a if you get out of the Christian worldview perspective into specific individuals that have opinions that I value. One individual is actually out of Austin, and he's on he produces. His name is George Friedman. He produces a newsletter called Geopolitical Futures, and what he does is, again, try to put what's happening into context on a fairly broad basis, broad level. Yes, he tackles individual things, but it's how does this fit into where we've been and where we're going? And so they're out there. I might have to look a little bit, given whatever your specific interests are. But find some individuals like that that you can really get a fuller and deeper view of whatever those specific issues are that you're interested in.
Yeah, that's good. I think too. I'm as a pastor, I'm always hesitant to be to recommend a source, because as soon as I do, it feels like I'm endorsing every single thing
Mm-hmm.
that person says.
Right.
And so I'm just, from my vocation and weight of influence, I'm just really, I usually will not, try to do that. I will say though that when I listen, I will listen to sources like even like some of the major news,
Mm-hmm.
headlines. I know that those are coming from a pretty strong angle,
Mm-hmm.
and in fact, usually pretty polarized.
Mm-hmm.
But I was talking to another younger pastor on our staff, and he said, when something's going on in the world, everybody's talking. When
Right.
a big thing is happening, everybody's talking about it. And listening to how even polarized sides talk about something can give you some things to grapple with. And so I do that. And there are sources that I do listen to Christianity Today. Anything I say though is like, how could you listen to this or this or this? There isn't a source I listen to that I think everything, they never have a slant, and there's
Right.
everything.
Yeah.
Everybody's got a slant.
Sure.
And so really what you're doing is you're trying to listen to things that at least seem to be trying to hold themselves accountable. If what you're listening to either says, this is the secret truth no one's telling you, I lean away from those. Those freak me out. The second thing that I'm kind of like real skeptical about is if what this source says is the other side is always, like no matter what they do, it's the dumbest thing in the world. I'm not going to make that like a primary source for myself. And so just because it's so easy to, especially if you get your news from like TikTok or like Instagram or whatever, or Facebook, you can get stuck in an algorithm that will only tell you certain things, and you will be discipled by what you are most listening to. And so I would just recommend read the scriptures, listen to a broad array of sources if you're interested. And I think you said this well, like ask trusted people in your church family. Like, I'm really wrestling with this. How do you deal with this? One of the best questions I ever heard from someone from within our church is he sent me a text and he called me up and he said, and I'm not going to even tell you who or what they were and who or what they were talking about, but he said, hey, I don't understand how a Christian could vote for X, and fill in whatever name. And he said, can you help me understand that? And that just showed such an openness. Now, it didn't change like what he thought, but it helped him be more compassionate and caring and thoughtful about how he engaged with people inside our own church body who were voting differently than him. And I just thought that was a really, really healthy question.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid to ask it.
Well, and just a little comment. AI is here, and I think to your point about algorithms, well, those are going to get even that much better. And so I think being very conscious of the electronic media that we're consuming, and knowing that the engines, that there's billions and billions of dollars behind the engines that's feeding that stuff to you. So you have to be really careful. And again, that's why you sort of look outside of and try to dig deeper into some of these other sources, so that you can start to maybe unravel a little bit of what they might not be telling you. So just a little bit of coming from the technology. So when before I retired, I was in the technology space. So some of that kind of stuff, as you see that coming, it's a little scary. So it's just something to I think to be aware of.
Yeah. I think that's good. And I think I would just close on maybe that idea is we're all grappling with how do you get good information? And I haven't found a perfect source yet. And so we just have to be shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves. And I hope that what everyone hears today is for us as a church, like life change through Jesus for every man, woman, and child. Like it's our vision for a reason. But we also want to help one another align our lives and engage with the messy world faithfully as followers in every space, including the political space. So that'll conclude this conversation. Thanks for joining us for this bonus episode. And if you have any questions or comments about what you've heard, just call Scott. No, I'm just kidding. You can reach out to us at info@northwaybiblechurch.com. So until next time.
Sounds good. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.